had a terminal disease. She was fighting it for about a month in the hospital. And the disease kind of took over her body, and she died, went up to heaven, met St. Peter, and could see on the other side of the gates that there was this banquet table set up with all of her family members and friends who had gone before her, and they were waiting for her, saying, come on in, come on in. She's all excited. She says, how can I come in? St. Peter says, very easy. All you have to do is spell a word. He says, well, what word is that? Love. She says, L-O-V. Well, welcome to heaven. She comes in. And she loves heaven. And she's volunteering, and she's helping out, and she's really engaged with the activities of what's going up there in heaven. And some time passes, and St. Peter's got an errand to do, and because she's so engaged, such a good volunteer, he said, would you cover the gate for me while I have to do this errand? And it so happens that at that moment, the man she was married to when she was on earth shows up at the gates. He says, I'm surprised to see you here. She says, well, I'm surprised to see you at the gate, right? Says, yeah, well, how did it go after I died? He says, it went great. He says, you remember that young nurse that was attending to you in the hospital? Well, we ended up getting married. And soon after that, I won the lottery. I was able to sell that old house. Remember that old house with the leaky basement? I was able to sell that. We bought a beautiful home. We went traveling around the world. We were having a great time. In fact, I was skiing. I was doing so great skiing. I fell, I hit my head, I broke my neck, and I died, and that's why I'm here. She says, how can I get in? She says, it's very easy. All you have to do is spell a word. She says, oh, great, what's the word? She says, Czechoslovakia. Wham! So what we know is that even though she was in heaven, she still had some healing issues to take care of. In life, apparently, she didn't quite get to that full acceptance mode, still had some attachments, a little anger maybe, a little envy, who knows. And so we're here to talk about spiritual work, because it's obvious that this woman hadn't quite completed what she needed to do as far as in consciousness. And, this idea of work and rest is so important for us, because if there's something that is just epidemic, I think all of us, is that sense of needing rest. I'm not just talking about sleep, which is obviously very important and needed and key to our health, but that sense of deep soul rest, where we have that sense of really letting go of everything and feeling a sense of freedom, breathing deeply, being able to raise our heads, feeling that joy of life, that pulse that beats within us. I faced this, maybe you did too, recently with these tornadoes that were passing through and the earthquake. I was at the Spanish retreat, and we had people from the Caribbean islands coming in Miami just when Irma was passing through there. We were very concerned about that, doing a lot of prayer. And then, no sooner had that happened than Maria comes through. And when we heard the news of Maria, I don't know about you, but there was something in me that just didn't want to hear it. It was too much. It was like, God, I can't go there, And of course, my heart went out in compassion to those people who had, double whammy. Then you hear the thing in Mexico, and it was like, whoa, it was way too much. And I just felt overwhelmed. I had to do some serious prayer just to be able to open up to what's happening, what's going on. And of course, to be able to release, find peace in the midst of all of that, which we're all called to do in times of that. So it took a lot of work for me to be able to get into a space where I could really open up for that. So that's what I'm talking about, that sense of, work that we have to do in order to find rest. We have a beautiful story in the Bible that teaches us beautifully about this dynamic. And Dana's going to read the scripture from John. It's a well-known story of the paralytic. Dana?
Thank you. And before I do, I think we need to, I mean no offense by this whatsoever, but we need to stop naming these hurricanes Hispanic names. There's just way too much passion.
you're right on that, Dana. I think you're right. There's something to do with the name, isn't there? Yeah.
So this is from the book of John. Now in Jerusalem by the sheep gate there was a pool called in Hebrew Bethzatha, which has 5 porticos. In these lay many invalids, blind, lame, and paralyzed. One man was there who had been ill for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had been there for a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to be made well, sir?" The sick man answered, "Sir, I have no one to put me in the pool when the water is stirred up. And while I'm making my way, someone else steps down ahead of me." And Jesus said to him, "Stand up, take your mat, and walk." At once the man was made well, and he took up his mat and began to walk. Now that day was a Sabbath. So the Jews said to the man who had been cured, "It is the Sabbath. It is not lawful for you to carry your mat." But he answered them, "The man who made me well said to me, 'Take your mat and walk.'" They asked him, "Who is the man who said that to you? Take it up and walk." Now the man who had been healed did not know who it was, for Jesus had disappeared into the crowd that was there. Later Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, "See, you have been made well. Do not sin anymore, so that nothing worse happens to you." The man went away and told the Jews that it was Jesus who made him well. Therefore the Jews started persecuting Jesus because he was doing such things on the Sabbath. But Jesus answered them, "My Father is still working, and I also am working." For this reason, the Jews were seeking all the more to kill him, because he was not only breaking the Sabbath, but he was also calling God his own Father, thereby making himself equal to God.
Beautiful, Dana. Thank you. Excellent. So the conflict in this story has to do with work. The Jewish authorities were very concerned that Jesus was working on the Sabbath. You remember, it says, you're going to work 6 days and you're going to take the Sabbath as rest. Now, the Jewish leaders interpreted that as spiritual law, and what they wanted to do is to offer ways for people to be able to follow spiritual law by putting all kinds of regulations about how they understood the difference between work and rest. So they set up a whole bunch of structures in the outer to tell people what rest means. For example, you are not allowed to lift things. So when this paralytic man gets healed and lifts his bed, he's working. And that's why the authorities approached him. You're violating spiritual law. You're lifting. Now, what's true is that obviously people could get dressed. So wearing clothes was not against spiritual law. If he had put that bed on as kind of like wrapped around him and, pretended it was kind of like his clothing, nobody would have said anything. He wasn't violating any laws. They had laws like this all over the place. Like, for example, it was on the Sabbath, you couldn't do any kind of medical procedures. In those days, they used vinegar for toothaches, for example, okay? So it was illegal for you to wash your mouth with vinegar because you're doing a medical procedure, right? But if you were to sit down to eat a salad and put a whole bunch of vinegar on your salad and eat the salad, nobody's going to say anything. They would say, in fact, "You're doing a good job. You're being a good man. You are following spiritual law. You got it going on." Same thing with travel. Not allowed to travel more than a mile from your home, approximately. But how do you define home? Turns out home is where you have some food and where you can eat. That's how they defined home. So if the day before you deposited some food in somebody's house a mile from your house, you go there, you sit down, you eat, you can go another mile, right? And you still haven't violated any laws. Now, this all sounds pretty funny, right? It sounds pretty ridiculous. But what they're trying to do is they're trying to honor what they perceive to be spiritual law, but expressed in the outer world, you see. And that's where they committed a mistake. So they approached Jesus. They said, "You're doing healing, right? Not allowed. Medical treatments not allowed on the Sabbath. We're going to get you." And Jesus responds and he says, "Look, I am working and God is working," in flagrant contradiction to how they perceived spiritual law. But what is Jesus trying to tell them? I think what he's trying to tell them is that you guys got it all wrong. You got the spiritual law hooked onto some kind of outer expression when the intention of this law, the real deep intention of the Sabbath, is to get that soul rest that we all need. We need to work, and we need to work so that our soul can rest. I think that's why he says, my Father is working and I'm working. Because you know, when you do your prayer work, you get to that magical place where you've surrendered something and something else, the God presence, does the work, right? So I'm working, God is working. And what he's saying is, as I work and as God works, I rest. That's my Sabbath. Now, he demonstrated this, but the healing of the paralytic. So let's take a look at that story, because that's what's going to help us understand how we can get that same rest in our lives, right? So the interesting thing is he walks into this area, with this pool of Bethesda, famous for healing properties. And notice that he approaches this paralytic. The paralytic doesn't call him over, doesn't seek Jesus' help. Jesus was somehow attracted to this guy or took attention to this guy. Very interesting. And he approaches the guy and he says, hey, you want to be healed? This guy's been there 38 years. To me, this is kind of like Jesus' sense of humor. And I kind of see him putting on some Groucho Marx glasses over here. Tony, thank you for the, he's going up and going, hey, you want to be healed? Hey, you want to be healed? The guy's been there 38 years, right? You want to be healed? What the heck are you doing here? You want to be healed? Hey, what are you, crazy? Get out of here. Come on, get out. Right? You want to be healed? And the guy comes up with a story. The story he's told who knows how many times. He's been there for 38 years. Look, my problem is every time the water moves, nobody's here to take me in, and I've been here for 38 years. So the question is, how did the paralytic heal? Now, the easy answer to anybody from a traditional church might be, well, Jesus healed him. The power within Jesus was extended from Jesus to the man, and the man rose up. But in Unity, we teach that all healing happens from the inside out. In fact, if you talk to a doctor, what they'll say is, the doctor will say, I can't heal you. What I can do is I can promote an environment of healing so that your body will heal itself. I will set the bones together, and I will make sure that they don't move so that the natural healing properties of the bone will fuse them. I will create an inner environment, inner culture within the body so that the cells with their healing intelligence will do their perfect work. If I take chemotherapy, I'm taking out the cells that are not helping me with the healing process so that the real healthy cells can renew and regenerate in a healthier way. Am I right, Cassandra? Something like that? We're creating an environment of healing. So what Jesus did was create an environment of healing for the paralytic. Now, the short answer to how he was healed, from my perception, is that Jesus, faces this guy. Do you want to be healed? Yeah. The guy says, yeah, I got his story. The paralytic doesn't give Jesus much to work on. But he does give him one thing, and this is important. He tells him basically, here's my story. And what I hear in his story is that my plan for my healing isn't working. He's come to the recognition after 38 years that his vision, his plan, his strategy for healing is not working. And that's in his heart. Now, that's not a lot. That's not a lot. That's not like saying, I'm open and receptive to healing. It's not saying I'm whole and free. It's not deep in prayer. It's saying my strategy isn't working. But that's all Jesus needed. That little crack of doubt in the consciousness was all that was needed to break through the consciousness and create an environment of healing for this man. what I believe happened is that Jesus looked at the man and not only saw the paralytic state, but saw beyond to the wholeness. And so basically raised up a mirror and showed the paralytic through his own perception of him who he truly is as a child of God. Created just as God created him, whole and strong and free, healthy. And in that instant, in that moment, all of the past, all of the present fell away. And in that instant, he knew it too. He hooked on to Jesus' consciousness, saw himself as whole and free, and in that moment of realization, stood up. That's what I believe happened. Now that sounds great, but you're saying to yourself, well, that's great for the paralytic, but what about me? I haven't seen Jesus walk around these parts lately, and we don't have no pool of Bethesda. How can I get my own healing? So let's analyze this story a little bit. Let's break it down, and let's look at it from the perspective of the paralytic and the perspective of Jesus. And sometimes when I do these kinds of interpretations, I like to take some liberties, and I like to do it in slow motion because this story is so fast. Hey, you want to be healed? Gives them the story, stand up and walk. What happened? Let's do it in slow motion, okay? So let's look at this from the perspective of the paralytic. Here's the paralytic, 38 years. He's got two basic blocks in consciousness, okay? He's got, this is, again, my perception, one of the false things that he's telling himself is that the key to my healing is for somebody to get me into that pool. It's dependent upon something in the outer changing in order for something within me to change. Now, the Course in Miracles calls that a plan for salvation. My plan for salvation. Whenever you have an idea that something in the outer's got to change in order for me to find peace, to be happy, to be restful, it's a plan for salvation based on an outer change. And we know that nothing's really going to happen until it happens from the inside, but we're still hooked on to these plans. It's such a prevalent thing. And I'm about ready to drop the truth bomb here, Patty. All right? So here we go. The paralytic is suffering because he's got a story he's telling himself that's not working, right? So here you go. Every time that we're suffering, we're lying to ourselves. Bam! Good morning. Every time we're suffering, we're lying to ourselves. You think about it. Now, there's a difference between feeling pain and suffering, right? We can feel pain. But when we get into suffering, we've engaged a story. And we're telling ourselves that story. And we're suffering because of that story. And that story ultimately is a lie. Because the truth of you is wholeness. You are just as God created you. You're holding on to a lie. You're telling yourself a lie. That's what the paralytic was doing. Now, I've had many plans for salvation. I think I shared with you once before, Mom, caring for Mom at home. There was an unspoken plan for salvation that we were holding with Laura. It basically said, when Mom passes away, we'll decide how we're going to live our life. In the meantime, we're going to care for her. Doesn't sound too awful, but in truth, we weren't living. We were waiting for somebody to die in order to live. Plan for salvation. We're going to be free when Mom passes away. Doesn't work. I left in June. I had this idea. Unity of New York is going to hire me. Going to be working over there on Fifth Avenue, baby. It's going to be rocking. Plan for salvation. Going to give me a New York City salary. It's going to be great. Unity of New York says, yeah. Plan for salvation doesn't work. So what do you do with these plans for salvation? You have to be aware of them. all right? Because they're going to create suffering in your life. Now, when the guy was thinking about healing, he's probably stuck in the past. Nobody's helped me in the past. He's probably maybe even fearful of the future. You know, what happens if I do heal? I got to go get a job. You know, I got to go back to my family. You know, I got to do something now. I got to, move out of here. You know, who knows what he's thinking about? He's concerned about the past. He's concerned about the future. And my gosh, he's got all this in conscience. Now, the second thing that he may be concerned about is I sense in his sharing there with Jesus that he feels that the world somehow owes him a reward for the suffering that he's endured. Does the world owe you a reward for the suffering you've endured? You know, you've had a hard day. You've really worked hard. You come home and you tell yourself, you know, I just want to lie in front of I've had such a hard day. I need to reward myself because I'm just going to sit in front of I'm going to veg out in front of the TV. Pick up a cold one. And you do it in the consciousness that I need a reward for the amount of energy, the work that I've done. Not because you just want it, but because you feel somehow you need to be rewarded for it. Okay? I have this in great measure. Got to watch out for this. I think I told you when I was born with a club foot and a bad hip. Spent the first year of my life in a cast-down hip, cast for a year. It was miserable. And in the consciousness of that baby, the thought was my parents owe me, what? More love, more attention, more something because of the pain that they have subjected me to. And that owe me consciousness was been projected into my life. My friends, my girlfriends, my wives, it's just all over the place. The world owes me because of the suffering that I've endured. And that's a terrible thing to carry. We need to let go of that. If you want to sit and watch TV for 5 hours, then do it. Not because the world owes you, but just because you make an adult choice. This is what I want to do. Damn the consequences. I will take on the consequences. If I want to go get drunk tonight, then I will assume the consequence. I want to go shopping. My credit cards are just about busted, but I'm going to go shopping anyway. I don't care if the creditors call me. I will face that, making an adult decision. Because every time I walk into a store, I feel prosperous. The people look at me as if I'm something great, and I love that, even if it's for 5 minutes. I'm making a decision. Nobody owes me anything, and this could be another truth bomb. Nobody owes us anything. All right? So those are the two things that are going on within the paralytic. Now, as Jesus faced him, and he has this magical moment, imagine that all the thoughts run through his head that throw him to the past, throw him to the future. So imagine that this moment, this instant with Jesus also includes like a referee. A referee that is not going to allow the thoughts of the paralytic to go to the past or to the future. Just imagine a referee in consciousness that's in there, and the guy's going to the past, referee goes, no! I'm fearful of the future. No! Holds him to the moment. Holds him to the moment. Referee's blowing the whistle. No, no, no. You stay here. You stay here. You stay here. Just imagine that, okay? Now, Jesus. Let's look at what's happening on the Jesus consciousness. He's attracted to the paralytic, or he approaches the paralytic for a reason. Why would that be? We understand that there's no coincidences. We understand that there's a power of attraction. There was something in that paralytic that drew Jesus to him. Compassion, love, obviously, but there was probably something more. Now, what Jesus saw in the paralytic is a man who'd been sitting there for 38 years. The guy tells him his story right away. And Jesus, because he's done his inner work, recognizes a plan for salvation when he hears one. Okay? What was the plan for salvation that Jesus might have had within his own consciousness that he had to heal? Do you remember the temptations in the desert? Why do you think Satan offered those 3 particular temptations to Jesus? Do you think they were randomly selected? Or do you think those are the healing plans for salvation that Jesus needed in the desert to heal in order to do his ministry? You remember what they were? Turn bread into wine, throw yourself from the temple and the angels will support you, and I will make you king over all of the kingdoms. So there was, magic or manipulation of the material. Pretty good trick, right? Plan for salvation. If I can manipulate stuff in the outer, I can be a pretty popular guy. Safety, you'll be protected. Thinking that he's got a pretty radical message and he might know that it's going to bother some people. Safety and security might be a plan for salvation that he needed. And then power. Any one of us here not have a plan for salvation that includes power? Those 3 at least he had to face in the desert. He had to see them. And you remember what he said? You have no power over me. Those beliefs, those things within me that I think will produce happiness, give me a great ministry, make me a great man, have no power over me. I'm going to stay with God. I'm going to stay with Spirit. I'm going to stay in the moment. So Jesus did his work with that consciousness to release it. The idea of, deserving a reward for suffering. I think he was working on the consciousness that he took to the cross, which just basically says there's no such thing as suffering. Even death isn't real. You can experience pain, but suffering is an illusion. One of the tremendous messages of the crucifixion. So you see, Jesus was facing that and working with those 2 issues. That's why the paralytic was attractive to him. And when he saw him, there was that connection, the soul connection. I've worked on these. I see it within him. That's why if he'd done his healing work, he could be a vehicle, a channel for healing in this man that has the exact same 2 issues. And so, of course, with that certainty that those things have no power, that the plan of salvation based on some outer thing is just going to lead to more suffering, he could say to the man, pick up your bed and walk with certainty. And that certainty, that faith, reflected onto the man, staying in the present moment, allowed him to drop the whole illusion of his bodily state and bring him into a sense of wholeness, you see. That's the miracle. So how do we do this in consciousness? Like I say, Jesus isn't walking around right now. But what's true is that what Jesus represents is within us. I think we can probably easily identify with the paralytic. Paralyzed in fear, paralyzed in action, paralyzed or whatever. Something's not quite moving, energy's a little stuck. We can all identify with the paralytic. If you don't have those 2 things of the plan for salvation and the need for reward for suffering, that's all right. You can put your own in. But the encounter with Jesus is the key here. The encounter with the higher mind action of the Christ within us is the key to healing. So what am I saying? You have an issue. You identify with the paralytic. You want this encounter. You might begin by asking yourself, do you really want to be healed? How long have you been carrying that load? I have to do some work in order to get the rest from the suffering. That's the message here. I need to work in order to rest. And ladies and gentlemen, what we teach in Unity is that prayer is the highest form of mind action. So we look at those aspects of ourselves. This plan for salvation is not working. I'm still wanting to be rewarded for my suffering. I want to let that go. I want to release that. You put yourself in the present moment. You get yourself a referee. Anytime you slip to the past or the yeah, but, or the future thing or the past thing, you hear a little bell. Stay here. Stay here. Stay here. Little referee is going to keep you in the present moment. Because in the present moment is when that healing, that environment for healing can happen. It's not going to happen in the future. It's going to happen right here. You need to put yourself here. And right here is where you might begin by calling out the name of God. Whatever that is for you. I like to use Father. Because when I grew up, I called my human father, my biological father, papi in Spanish. So for me to say Father kind of shifts it into the divine. I like to say Father, but you choose your own word. But you say it from your heart. And you begin there. And you hold it. And it begins to resonate within you. And as you hold it, keeping yourself to the present moment, the referee blowing the whistle, you merge into a consciousness that now it's not just Father out there, but Father inside, Father within, God present, God in me. And now the body is beginning to tingle. The cells of the body are beginning to move. Father within me, God within me. That sort of movement. You're grounding it here. You're staying to the present. You're in prayer. You're opening your heart to that. And over time, as the prayer continues, you land upon God is, I am. The Father and I are one. God is, I am. And now you're exploding with consciousness in the present moment, exploding with a new awareness of who and what you are is being revealed to you, in your senses, in your mind, and your very cells of your body are rising up to the truth of who you are, because we don't have to do anything to know who we are. We are who we are. It's a recognition. That's what healed the paralytic, a recognition of what was already true. And that's what we do in prayer, a recognition of who we really are. And so when Jesus says, listen to this, and I'll read it twice, and then I'll close. He says in Matthew, come to me, all that are weary and carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. And we hear that, we might hear it in our mind's eye, we might see Jesus speaking that to us. But now hear it from your heart, from your higher consciousness that's calling you calling you. In the story of the paralytic, Jesus and the paralytic, we are both. So this is your heart calling to you. Listen once again. Come to me if you are weary and carrying heavy loads, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Amen. God bless you all.